As soon as the second generation SRX got its refresh in 2013, one thing that immediately caught my eye was the updated side vents. In my opinion, with this small change, the side of the SRX now looked more upscale, and the side vent no longer appeared to be an afterthought slapped on at the last minute. Now the original vents felt cheap looking and outdated, and I set out to see if they could be swapped. Little did I know what I was getting myself into with this project. I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler here. This is not an easy modification, but it is possible. And by the end of this video, you will be able to make this look like this. So I actually pulled off this modification successfully way back in June of 2013. At the time, I posted a brief overview of the process over on CadillacForums.com with the intention of putting it together a video. Over 4 years later, and I'm finally getting around to it. One advantage about the delay, though, I can now report that this modification is still holding up great to this day. Let's get started with a quick look at the back side of the original side vents. The two orange things you see are clips that let the vent snap into the body of the SRX. If you look closely, there are also black posts near these clips. When I first started this project, I looked at some photos of the rear of the updated vents online, and at a glance everything looked like it would line up. I mean, after all, what were they going to do? Modify the actual body panel between the 2012 model and 2013? So I went ahead and ordered a set. I'll post those part numbers in the video description below. Now let's talk about how to pull the original vents off. First, you will want to cut the steering wheel all the way in the direction of the side vent you are working on. This will allow you enough room to work. We'll start on the passenger side. You will want to remove these screws. Now you can pull the wheel liner back far enough to access the back of the vent. Feel around for those plastic clips with one hand. Release the clips by squeezing each one while pulling on the vent. Pull the vent loose, disconnect the electrical plug, and leave the plug hanging out of its hole. The passenger side is a breeze. Once you get to the driver's side, take a moment to appreciate the creative engineering that went into the design of the shape of the windshield washer fluid reservoir, because you will be cursing those engineers in a moment. Where the passenger side was roomy and easy to work with, this side is totally the opposite. The aforementioned tank makes it a very tight squeeze to get your hand and arm in. The bottom clip is hard enough, but that top clip, don't say I didn't warn you. It took me about 20 minutes. The way I finally got it loose was this. Sit beside the vent, your body facing the front of the car. Use your right hand arm to access the top clip. This sounds the opposite of how you would want to do it, but that's what finally worked for me. Once I got the original vents off, the first thing I did was try to snap on one of the new vents. It was at this point I realized I had a major problem. Apparently, Cadillac did change the body panel. The holes wouldn't line up. To be honest, at this point I considered giving up and selling the new vents on eBay, but I decided to take some paper and make a template of the new vent just to see what would need to be done. As you can see, 3 of the 4 smaller holes actually line up fine. We would need a new hole at the top, and the large hole in the middle needs to be larger. Thankfully, I know a guy who works at a body shop, so I whipped up a better version of my template, which he used to mark off and carefully make the modifications to the body. I then used some touch-up paint on the edges to prevent rust. With that issue out of the way, let's talk about the other change with the new vents, electrical. As you can see, the old vent just had 2 pins. These were used to provide power to the turn signal bulb built into the old vents. The new vents have 6 pins. First, let's get a general understanding on how the new vents work. Unlike the old vents, which used a regular old incandescent 12-volt bulb, everything in the new vents is LED. And unlike the old vents, which only have a turn signal indicator, the new vents have 2 functions built in: the amber turn signal indicator LED, as well as a white light tube that comes on with the parking lights. I had some concerns initially about how all this worked, since LED lights are generally low voltage. So I sat down and experimented with one of the new vents to figure out the function of the 6 pins. The good news here is the new vent simply used 12 volts on both circuits. All the step down of the power and the switching between the turn signal indicator and the light tube is done internally. When the vent senses 12 volts pulsing on its turn signal circuit, it automatically shuts off the white LED tube and activates the amber turn signal LED. When it stops getting power on the turn signal circuit, it switches the white LED light tube back on. So here's a pinout diagram I made for the connection at the back of the old vents. We already have a ground and the 12 volt turn signal power in place from the old vents. We'll just need to grab 12 volt power from the parking light circuit. More on that later. But first, we have to figure out how to tie it into the 6-pin connector on the new vents. I did some research and digging around, and because the new 6-pin connector used on the 2013 and up SRX is tied directly into the wiring harness, there is really no way to purchase it separately. I guess you could go to a junkyard and try to get a couple, but I found a much simpler solution. Most computer towers use one or more of these style connectors for their front panel switches, LEDs, and USB ports. Since I work at a computer repair shop, we have tons of these laying around. If you don't have one, stop by your local computer repair shop. Chances are they will have them laying around too and just give you a couple. Since these are typically 8-pin connectors, we'll need to cut a couple pins off. This is easy to do with some wire cutters, and then come back and clean up the end of the connector with a utility knife. Now you have a connector that fits the 6-pin connection on the back of the new vents perfectly. I came back and filled the void around the connector with some hot glue just for extra insurance against moisture or it wiggling loose. Again, I did this mod over 4 years ago and it's still working great. Now let's talk about how to run the wire for the extra power we'll need from the parking light circuit to each vent. I'll briefly talk about how to pull all these plastics off to gain access to run the wires, but for a more detailed look you can check out my other video on removing the front bumper cover. There are 10 push-type fasteners that I've highlighted in this photo. Remove them, and then you will be able to pull these plastic covers off. I find that disconnecting this rubber gasket on both sides and pulling the plastics off in 3 pieces makes it easier. The big center piece comes out first, then the right and left sides that cover the top of the struts. Now we can get a good look at how I routed this wire. You can see where the wire comes up from the passenger side vent on the very left. From here it splits and runs back behind the air filter box and up to the rear passenger side headlight where I'm picking up power from the parking light circuit. You will be looking for a dark brown wire with a gray stripe. It is near the end of one end of the plug with one wire between it and the end of the plug. I used a crimped splice connector and tied my 18-gauge wire into that. For the driver's side vent, I split off and ran a wire along the firewall, zip tying to an existing harness. Anywhere I was concerned about the wire getting damaged or hot, I covered it in more corrugated wire loop. You can see here I ran the wire behind these tanks, around the strut tower, and down into the body to the driver's side vent. Now we should have 3 wires coming out of each vent hole. 1 parking light power wire, the one you just ran, 1 turn signal power wire, and 1 ground. The turn signal power and the ground will be the existing factory plug. The ground will be the black one, the power will be some other color. I chose to use some more of those crimp connectors behind the factory plug so that everything could be reversed if for some reason you needed to.
Next, I crimped on some of the 18 gauge wire on each of the factory plugs behind the plug, about 6 inches each. The wires that will be coming from your computer header are too small for the crimp connectors, so this is a necessary step. Be sure to place a piece of heat shrink tubing on each of the 3 18 gauge wires you will have. We'll need this soon. Now use my pinout and solder each of your 3 wires to the correct wire coming from the computer header. The ground will go to pin 5, the parking light goes to pin 2, the turn signal wire goes to pin 1. The rest of the wires were not used. Next, slide your heat shrink tubing over each of your solder joints and heat it up until it forms a good seal over each wire. At this point, I wrap the whole thing electrical tape and some corrugated plastic wire loom over that. Now would be a good time to hook up your new vents and make sure they work. Turn on your parking lights. The light pipe should be white. Now turn on the hazards. A bright amber LED should start flashing, and in unison the light pipe will flash amber. Notice that in between flashes the light pipe is actually off, not white. Now turn off the hazards. The light pipe and the LED will stop flashing and the light pipe will remain off for a few seconds. Then automatically go back to white. And that's pretty much it. Once you have all the wires tied together and have tested the vents, snap them back in and enjoy your very unique SRX. While most people don't know all the little changes that were made from 2012 to 2013, I have confused a few SRX fanatics and service advisors when I tell them it's a 2010. Well guys, I hope this video was helpful. Consider giving it a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribing to my channel. Thanks everyone.